The Hero's Journey of Freemasonry. Audio version Part 4. By Jeff Morgan. Copyright The Hero's Journey of Freemasonry, 2025. Jeff Morgan, all rights reserved. This work is a personal exploration of Freemasonry's symbolic and esoteric dimensions. It is not an official publication of, nor endorsed by, any Grand Lodge, Masonic jurisdiction, or recognized Masonic authority. The views expressed are solely those of the author. Chapter 3. The Master Mason, Death, Resurrection, and the Soul's Completion. The Allegory of Solomon's Temple, the Blueprint of the Perfected Soul. Solomon's Temple as the grand design of the soul. The Temple of Solomon holds a central place in Freemasonry, not merely as a historical or architectural structure, but as a cosmic blueprint for the development of the perfected soul. It is a sacred allegory illustrating the initiate's journey towards self-mastery, enlightenment, and ultimate union with the divine. Each element of the temple corresponds to a stage in the evolution of consciousness, guiding the initiate from ignorance to wisdom, from imperfection to perfection, from separation to unity with the grand architect of the universe. The construction of Solomon's temple reflects the internal work of transformation, the lifelong labor of shaping the soul into a vessel worthy of divine light. It was said to have been built without the sound of tools, signifying that true self-perfection is an internal process, accomplished through silent contemplation, self-discipline, and spiritual refinement. Just as the stones of the temple were cut, polished, and perfectly fitted before they were assembled, so too must the mason shape his own rough ashlar, imperfect self, into a perfected ashlar, enlightened soul. This echoes the ancient Hermetic and Platonic teachings that emphasized inner harmony with divine law and cosmic order. The temple's structure as a reflection of the soul. Just as Solomon's temple was designed with divine proportions and sacred geometry, so too is the human soul structured according to universal archetypes. Each section of the temple represents a phase in the initiate's journey, corresponding to the layers of consciousness and the path toward enlightenment. The twin pillars, Jachin and Boaz, the gateway to higher understanding. The first threshold the initiate encounters is marked by the twin pillars, Jachin and Boaz, standing at the entrance of the temple. These pillars symbolize duality, balance, and initiation, representing the interplay of opposing but complementary forces. Jachin, he shall establish, represents stability, wisdom, and divine knowledge. Boaz, in strength, represents strength, action, and the power of manifestation. Together, these pillars reflect the Kabbalistic tree of life, where the two columns of mercy and severity must be balanced in order to ascend to divine knowledge. Passing between these pillars signifies the Mason's movement from the outer world of material existence to the sacred space of self-discovery. It is the first test, the acceptance of the duality of existence, and the recognition that true wisdom lies in balancing intellect with action, reason with intuition, and strength with mercy. The outer court, the realm of the profane world. The outer court of Solomon's temple represents the uninitiated state, the domain of the physical senses, the ego, and the material world. It is where most individuals remain, unaware of the deeper mysteries of existence. In Masonic initiation, the entered apprentice exists within this realm, symbolizing the unrefined state of the soul. The initiate begins his journey here, recognizing that he is but a rough stone in need of shaping and purification. Just as the ancient initiates of the Egyptian, Eleusinian, and Hermetic mystery schools were required to leave behind worldly distractions before entering the sacred temples, so too must the Mason recognize his ignorance before he can receive true wisdom. The outer court is a place of preparation, where the seeker must develop moral discipline, self-awareness, and the desire for enlightenment before being permitted to ascend further into the mysteries. The middle chamber, the domain of intellectual and spiritual enlightenment. Beyond the outer court lies the middle chamber, accessible only to those who have begun the process of inner refinement. In Masonic ritual, this corresponds to the fellowcraft degree, where the initiate ascends the winding staircase in pursuit of intellectual and spiritual mastery. The middle chamber represents the awakening of higher consciousness, the stage at which the seeker moves beyond blind belief and begins to comprehend the hidden laws of the universe. This chamber is the symbolic seat of the 7 liberal arts and sciences, emphasizing that wisdom is attained through learning, contemplation, and disciplined study. Yet, this is not the final stage. The middle chamber offers glimpses of divine order, but the initiate has not yet reached the most sacred place, the inner sanctum of the soul, where true unity with the divine is realized. The sanctum sanctorum, holy of holies, the inner chamber of the perfected soul. At the heart of Solomon's temple lies the sanctum sanctorum, or the holy of holies, the most sacred space where the Ark of the Covenant was kept and where the divine presence, Shekinah, resided. In Freemasonry, this sacred chamber represents the final stage of the initiate's journey, the realization of the perfected soul. The Holy of Holies corresponds to the highest sphere of consciousness in mystical traditions. Kabbalah aligns with Kether, the crown of divine enlightenment. Platonism corresponds to the realm of pure forms, where truth and beauty exist in their highest state. Christian mysticism reflects the inner sanctum of the soul, where Christ, the Logos, dwells within. In the Masonic journey, the Master Mason degree symbolizes the attempt to enter this sacred space, but the initiate finds that something is missing, the lost word, the ultimate truth of divine unity. It is only through his symbolic death and rebirth that he can finally grasp that which was lost, the knowledge of his own eternal connection to the divine mind of God. To build the temple is to build the soul. Solomon's temple is not just an external structure, it is the architecture of the soul. The initiate, like an operative stonemason, must shape himself from a rough, unpolished stone into a perfected stone, capable of fitting into the divine structure. This is the great work of Freemasonry, the refinement of the self through experience, initiation, and spiritual transformation. This process requires patience, discipline, and inner labor. Just as the temple was built without the sound of tools, so too must the initiate work inwardly, in silence, refining his thoughts, actions, and intentions until he becomes worthy to enter the Holy of Holies. Reflections, the temple and the soul, a sacred parallel. Solomon's temple stands as one of the most enduring symbols in Freemasonry, not only as a historical and architectural wonder, but as a representation of the perfected soul. Every aspect of its construction mirrors the initiate's journey towards self-perfection, revealing that the true temple is not a physical structure, but the internal work of the Mason upon himself. The initiate begins as a rough stone, unshaped and unpolished, but through the teachings of Freemasonry, he learns to smooth his imperfections, transforming himself into a perfected ashlar, a living stone fit for the temple of universal truth. Through the allegory of Solomon's temple, Freemasonry teaches that the path to enlightenment is not external but internal. The lodge itself, with its sacred geometry and symbolic furnishings, is a reflection of the initiate's soul, guiding him towards self-mastery and divine unity. The Master Mason, like the ancient builders of Solomon's temple, must continue the great work, not by erecting temples of stone, but by shaping himself into a vessel of wisdom, strength, and beauty. Thus, to build the temple is to build the soul. The true master is not one who merely understands the symbols of the temple, but one who embodies them, transforming his very being into a reflection of divine perfection. The Master Mason degree. Death of the ego and rebirth of the soul. The Master Mason degree represents the culmination of the Masonic journey, where the initiate undergoes a profound transformation, symbolized by the death and rebirth of Hiram Abiff. This is not merely a moral lesson, but a deep allegory of the human condition, illustrating the necessary destruction of the false self, ego, and the awakening to higher consciousness. The initiate must face his own limitations, illusions, and attachments before he can be truly raised to a new understanding of existence. At its core, this ritual conveys a universal spiritual truth that the soul must die to its old, unrefined nature before it can be reborn into divine awareness. This theme is reflected in alchemy, mythology, mystery traditions, and world religions, all of which teach that only through symbolic death can true enlightenment be attained. Hiram Abiff's death as the shattering of the ego. The legend of Hiram Abiff, the Grand Master Architect of Solomon's Temple, is one of the most profound allegories in Freemasonry. According to the tradition, Hiram was confronted by three ruffians who demanded the master's word, the secret knowledge that grants power and wisdom. When he refused to betray his sacred trust, he was struck down and buried. While often interpreted as a lesson in fidelity and integrity, Its deeper meaning lies in the symbolism of the death of the ego, the false self that clings to illusion, power, and separateness from the divine. The ruffians as forces of the lower self. The three ruffians represent the forces that hinder spiritual growth and seek to dominate the higher self. Ignorance, the blindness of the unenlightened mind, which rejects deeper understanding. Materialism, the attachment to worldly desires and possessions. Fear, the resistance to change and spiritual growth. By refusing to yield to these lower forces, Hiram meets his symbolic death, representing the destruction of the ego. This moment is a spiritual crisis, the breaking down of the old self to make way for something greater. The universality of death and rebirth. This theme of ego death followed by spiritual resurrection is echoed in multiple esoteric and religious traditions. Alchemy, the nigredo stage. The first stage of transmutation is nigredo, or the blackening, the death of the base, impure elements before purification can begin. Hiram's death is the nigredo of the Mason, where his false self is destroyed so that he may be reborn as something higher. Christianity, the crucifixion and resurrection. Christ's crucifixion represents the death of the earthly self, paving the way for resurrection and the redemption of the soul. Just as Christ was buried in the tomb before rising again, Hiram's interment is a metaphor for the initiate's burial in ignorance before he is raised into wisdom. Ancient mystery schools, death and rebirth initiations. In the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, initiates were symbolically buried and underwent trials in darkness before being reborn into new spiritual awareness. 16. In Egyptian and Mithraic mysteries, candidates faced symbolic death before being raised into the light. Through Hiram's death, the initiate experiences a moment of darkness, uncertainty, and loss, mirroring the trials of mythical heroes who must first descend into the underworld before emerging with newfound wisdom. But as the old self dies, something greater must rise in its place, and that is the true significance of the Master Mason's raising. The raising as the soul's awakening to universal consciousness. The raising of the Master Mason is not just a return to life, it is an initiation into a new level of awareness. When the initiate is lifted from the grave of ignorance, he is not the same man who was buried. He has been transformed, reborn, and illuminated. The 5 points of fellowship, unity with humanity and the divine. In Masonic ritual, the 5 points of fellowship are central to this raising, symbolizing the unity of the individual soul with all of humanity and the divine. These are not merely physical gestures, but sacred symbols of brotherhood, the recognition of universal kinship, guidance, the transmission of wisdom from teacher to seeker, support, the promise to aid and uplift the soul of another, connection, the awareness that all souls are interconnected, union, the realization that the divine presence resides within. To be raised as a Master Mason is to realize that one's consciousness is not an isolated entity, but a fragment of the universal mind. This mirrors the mystical realization found in many spiritual traditions. Kabbalah, the return to the divine source. In Kabbalistic teachings, enlightenment comes when the soul recognizes its unity with Ein Sof, the infinite divine presence. The raising of the Master Mason reflects this ascent back to divine consciousness. Hinduism and Vedanta, the illusion of separateness. Maya in Hindu philosophy, the soul, Atman, is not separate from Brahman, the universal consciousness. The realization that Tat Tvam Aci, thou art that, is a moment of awakening, just as the Master Mason awakens to his unity with the grand architect of the universe. Gnosticism, the liberation from the material world. In Gnostic thought, the soul must escape the illusions of the physical world to return to its true, divine nature. The raising of the Master Mason symbolizes this liberation, the moment the soul recognizes its higher origin. The eternal quest for the lost word. Yet, even after being raised, the Master Mason discovers that something remains incomplete. The lost word has not been found. This moment holds profound significance, teaching that enlightenment is not a destination but a journey. The lost word represents the highest truth, the ultimate knowledge of divine unity, which remains hidden until the soul is fully prepared to receive it. Its loss and continual search symbolize the eternal nature of the spiritual quest. The lost word across traditions. In Kabbalah, the ineffable name of God, Tetragrammaton, whose full meaning remains concealed. In Christianity, the Logos, or the divine word, through which all creation is made. In Hinduism, the Aum, the primal sound and cosmic vibration, which which unites the seeker with the divine. The search for the lost word is the soul's eternal quest for enlightenment, the pursuit of a truth that can only be fully realized within. Reflections: the death that leads to illumination. The Master Mason's degree is the pinnacle of the Masonic journey, teaching that spiritual rebirth is only possible through the destruction of the false self. The legend of Hiram Abiff, like the myths of Osiris, Christ, and other dying and resurrected figures, illustrates an eternal truth that one must pass through death to reach a higher state of existence. For the initiate, this death is not literal. It is the breaking away of the ego, the detachment from the illusion of separateness, and the realization that the soul is part of something much greater. The raising of the Master Mason is not just a return to life, but an awakening to the universal consciousness, the mind of God. Freemasonry, like the ancient mystery schools, preserves this great truth. The Master Mason is not just a man who has completed a series of degrees. He is one who has symbolically died and been reborn into light. The journey does not end here. Rather, the initiate has been given a new vision, a new awareness, and a new responsibility to continue building the inner temple, refining the soul, and seeking the lost knowledge of the divine. As the Master Mason stands raised, he does so not as the man he was, but as a soul reborn, aware that his journey toward enlightenment has only just begun. The search for the lost word, the ultimate realization of divine truth, remains an eternal quest, one that must be pursued with wisdom, integrity, and the unwavering desire to walk in the light.